put your money on me. If you think I'm losing you, you must be crazy. All your money on me. Never gonna let you go, even when it's easy. Put your money on me. Tuck me in the bed and wake me when I'm dead. I know that you gotta be free, but I'm never gonna let it go. If there was a race for your heart, it started before you were born. Perfect cloud formed sky, clouds made of ambient, sitting on carpets in the basement of heaven. We were born innocent, but it lies today. Maybe you can give all the money away, but if there's a race for your heart, it's over before it starts. So put your money on me. If you think I'm losing you, you must be crazy. All your money on me. Never gonna let you go, even when it's easy. Put your money on me. Go tuck me in the bed and wake me when I'm dead. I know that you gotta be free, but I'm never gonna let it go.
Kentucky Route Zero was developed by a studio called Cardboard Computer and was funded through the crowdfunding website Kickstarter in 2011. The first act was released in 2013, and subsequent acts were released over the following years, as well as interactive interludes that allowed for experimentation in form and storytelling. The final act, which was scheduled for 2018, was delayed, and then the whole thing was packaged together and released. All 5 acts, and the interludes, which is how I played it for the very first time. It is a heavily text-based, point-and-click adventure game, echoing back to the style of the LucasArts games from the 1980s and 1990s, although KRZ strips out all of the puzzle aspects to focus more on mood, affect, and character. You play, or at least start playing, as Conway, an aging truck driver with a rattling old truck making what will be the last delivery for an antique store. You start by pulling off of I-65 into an old roadside station called Equus Oils. You need directions, so you pull in and ask Joseph, the old-timer who runs the place, if he can give you and your dog directions to 5 Dogwood Drive. To get there, Joseph says, you need to take the 0. To get to the 0 is a little tricky, but Joseph, God bless him, seems to remember that someone he knows might be able to point you the right way, and you can print directions to their house where Weaver Marquez might be, and they should be able to steer you the right way. Seeing as you're heading that way anyway, why not drop off this old TV with Weaver, as it's theirs after all? To print off directions, you need to use Joseph's computer, but the power is out, so you're asked to restart the generator in the basement. When you're down there, you see 3 people arguing about the rules to a tabletop game they're playing. They don't seem to be able to see or hear you, and when you mention it to Joseph, he seems to think you might be hallucinating. You get the power back on, and Joseph tells you that he doesn't remember his computer password exactly, but it's kind of long, kind of like a short poem. One of those short poems that really sums it all up. Whichever option you choose will be successful, so there's no pressure and you don't need to guess. You just need, as Joseph puts it, to think like a poet. So when you go to the computer, you have multiple choices, and really the question becomes not what is the password and how do I get it right, but rather what kind of poetry do I want to write right now? This is a trick that the game pulls often and incredibly well. You don't have freedom in the sense that's often promised by video games generally. The freedom to go where you want, to use what you want to do, and in quite a lot of games, the freedom to make changes and impact the plot or change the ending you might get. We could call this external freedom, the freedom to act and speak in certain ways within a range of given options within the game world. What Kentucky Route Zero offers, on the other hand, is an internal freedom. You are within a story which has a set way of unfolding, and the game presents you with a range of dialogue options, and sometimes you even get to direct entire conversations, picking and choosing options for whichever participant's perspective a given scene is focalized through. Conway is going to go through the story, but the kind of person Conway is left up to you to explore. For me, he was an easygoing kind of guy who didn't say a whole lot, and who was, as the story unfolded, increasingly prone to nostalgia and memory. What this gives the player is an internal freedom. You choose how the various moments you play through impact and shift the interiority of the character, and given the nature of those choices, what you're also doing is articulating how the game is shifting your own feelings in response to the scenes that it puts not just characters, but you within. You have a huge amount of interior freedom. We're so often subject to stories, narratives, and forces over which we have so little control. But our internal life, our moods, affects, our orientation towards the world is the space in which this game gives freedom like no other I've played. So, if you take just a little time to poke around in Joseph's emails when you're looking for directions to Weaver Marquez's farm, you come across a couple of emails from the Consolidated Power Company. Apparently, Joseph hasn't been paying his bills, and whilst the tone of the emails has the upbeat smile of corporate language, the implicit threats are there too, lurking behind the words. Downgraded credit, downgraded supply, that kind of thing. The Consolidated Power Company is a force which comes up repeatedly throughout the entire game. They control Joseph's account, and his trouble staying on top of his bills are the first indication that the world of KRZ contains a troubling economic instability. This gets reinforced when you finally make it out to the Marquez farmhouse. It, like so many other places you'll visit in this game, has seen better days. You make it out there and find Weaver Marquez. She's a former mathematician who asks you about your work. As Weaver puts it, it's hard times everywhere. Her parents have stopped paying the bank because they can't afford it. They're gone now, and Weaver is here because there just isn't anywhere else to go. I shouldn't even be here, she says. But I just stayed. Where did it all go wrong? Why don't all of the people in Kentucky Route Zero have anywhere else to go? In Slate, Laura Hudson writes about the ways that the game highlights displacement. Everyone that you come across has nowhere to turn. And the reason for that is both simple and staggeringly complicated, namely the overarching crises of capitalism which this game emerges from, and by which the development of this game is indelibly marked. Look, this probably isn't the place for an in-depth discussion of the subprime mortgage crisis and the resultant banking and financial crises, but if you're looking for some places to start, then there are a couple of useful sources in the video description. However, the problem with these sources is that the narrative is necessarily speculative. The financial crisis was a mess of abstract financialism that can seem completely disconnected from the day-to-day, actual lived reality of, you know, people. But, as Michael Lewis puts it in The Big Short, a key aspect of the financial crisis was a mortgage industry that sought to create incentives to make a home no longer a place to live, but a financial asset. You weren't supposed to actually live in homes, by and large. You were just supposed to use it to speculate with. The point here is not that homeowners were negligent in some way or at fault, but that mortgage companies and other financial service companies were predatory. On September 15th, 2008, the colossal financial firm Lehman Brothers announced that they would file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $613 billion in debt and a further $155 billion in bond debt. For many, it served as the high-profile example of just what was to come, the first sign of the ground rushing towards you faster than you might have expected. Nearly 9 million people lost their jobs and at least 10 million lost their homes between 2006 to 2014, and less than a third of the people who lost their homes would ever return to home ownership at a later date. As Weaver puts it, it's hard times everywhere. Eventually, depending on the routes you take and the stops along the way, you end up at the Elkhorn Mine, which runs alongside a network of caves. There, you run into Weaver's cousin, Shannon, the one who repairs old television sets. What she's doing there isn't clear until sometime later, so the two of you decide to poke around the mines and see what you find. The place has been deserted for years, and so you decide to see if the old equipment works. There's an accident. As the game puts it, Conway breathes and relaxes as a peal of feedback and loose rock engulfs him. Conway gets hurt, and then, along with Shannon, you have to try and explore this cave network. But why caves? Obviously, there is a narrative reason why you're there, but as game studies writer Aubrey Anable points out, KRZ is firstly directly engaging with the history of gaming, particularly something like Colossal Cave Adventure that was released in 1976, an engagement which will only get more explicit as the game progresses into Act 2 and 3. But it isn't just the history of video games that gets explored, as you and Shannon, named for the legendary Claude Shannon, perhaps, wander through the network of caves, but also a broader history, a working class radical history that the contemporary capitalist forces which have hollowed out the world of the Zero has done much to try and bury. The history of labor in America, particularly in Appalachia, is a history of often very violent, bloody exploitation, working class militancy, and the violent repression of organized labor by powerful coal company operators and mining companies. An example. Around 100 years ago, West Virginia was the site of the largest armed uprising since the American Civil War, when 10,000 armed coal miners confronted 3,000 lawmen and strikebreakers called the Logan Defenders, who were backed by coal miner operators during the miners' attempt to unionize the southwestern West Virginia coal fields. The battle ended after approximately 1 million rounds of ammunition were fired, and the United States Army intervened. It's known as the Battle for Blair Mountain, and the miners were led by legendary labor organizers such as Mother Jones and Bill Blizzard. A decade later, and about 150 miles to the southwest, Harlan County in Kentucky became the site for a decade of violence and skirmishes between union organizers, coal company operators, and their armed forces. Union organizers would frequently be run out of town, armed confrontation and scuffles were common, and the National Guard were frequently called in. Not for nothing did this decade of Union struggle leave the area with the nickname of Bloody Harlan. Then, 40 years later, it all happened again. Miners at the Brookside Mine in Harlan County voted to join the UMWA, the United Mine Workers of America. The owners of the mine, Duke Power, refused to recognize the vote and give the miners the union contract that they asked for, so the miners walked out. They stayed out for over a year, and things only ended when a striking miner was shot and killed. It's documented in Barbara Koppel's Oscar-winning documentary, Harlan County, USA. And all of this is a smaller piece of a longer history. Robert Ovetz's book, When Workers Shot Back, is an incredible work which shows the radicalism of the early 20th century didn't emerge from nowhere, but has its roots in things like the railroad strikes of 1877. Workers were necessary, needed for the rapid expansion of industry, but also seen as hugely disposable. So this early labor history shows the contradictions and antagonisms of how capitalism treats working class people more generally. And all of this leads us to the miners in the Elkhorn mine. Whilst they didn't go on strike, maybe they couldn't, what happened to them is entirely congruent with the labor history of the area. So the miners who worked there had to buy equipment, safety gear, shovels, pickaxes, even canaries to help them detect gas. All of this wasn't paid for in cash, but in company scrip that you have to use cash to buy. Pretty standard company practice, especially in the history of mining. The owners of the Elkhorn mine even ration the electricity. One day something goes wrong. There's an accident, a flood. The miners had to dig their way out, but given the rationed power and the limited equipment, well, the lights went out. The water rose. All of them drowned in the dark, desperately trying to dig their way out. As you explore on a minecart, you can turn out the lamp, and in the sparks from the track, as you trek through the pitch blackness, you might just see shadowy figures standing there in the dark. When Shannon goes off to explore an area that was flooded, she returns to tell you that she found a pile of mining helmets. The mine is haunted. The owners of the mine? The Consolidated Power Company.
Your Honor, years ago I recognized my kinship with all living beings, and I made up my mind that I was not one bit better than the meanest on earth. I said then, and I say now, that while there is a lower class, I am in it, and while there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. I am opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man who does absolutely nothing that is useful to amass a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence. This order of things cannot always endure. I have registered my protest against it. I recognize the feebleness of my effort. But fortunately, I am not alone. There are multiplied thousands of others who, like myself, have come to realize that before we may truly enjoy the blessings of civilized life, we must reorganize society upon a mutual and cooperative basis. And to this end, we have organized a great economic and political movement that spreads over the face of all the earth. I can see it. I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity. The people are awakening. In due time, they will and they must come to their own. When the mariner, sailing over tropic seas, looks for relief from his weary watch, he turns his eyes toward the Southern Cross, burning luridly above the tempest-vexed ocean. And as the midnight approaches, the Southern Cross begins to bend. The whirling worlds change their places, and with starry finger points, the Almighty marks the passage of time upon the dial of the universe. And though no bell may beat the glad tidings, the lookout knows that the midnight is passing, and that relief and rest are close at hand. Let the people everywhere take heart of hope. For the cross is bending. The midnight is passing. And joy cometh with the morning.
You make it to the Zero and wind up at probably one of the most important locations for the entire game, the strangely named and mysterious Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces. It's this beautiful, echoing stage-like lobby that also has a range of floors with offices, one of which appears to be populated entirely by bears for some reason. The purpose of the Bureau is the incorporation of abandoned spaces into new productive functions. It is, in essence, a model for how capitalism as a system thinks about space. Capitalism, of course, doesn't want places to have singular uses. This is inefficient and limits the world rather than liberates it for the ever growing and shifting demands of the market. Capitalism is marked by uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation, according to Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto. Demanding as it does the never-ending churn of revolution, it did not just result in colossal violence, but also constant transformation of the world around us. To finish the famous quote from the manifesto, all fixed, fast-frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and relations with his kind. Places become assets, almost literally liquefied, turned into abstractions that are endlessly malleable. What this ignores is the colossal human cost. People are inefficient, in a sense, but they are adaptable. Clear out the people and find a new use for a place, and you'll soon find that you have more people coming along. In a way, the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces functions as a way of mediating this process, of turning the concrete particularity of place, a place someone has loved, spent time in, formed memories within, into an asset to be repurposed and geared towards the renewed accumulation of capital. What's remarkable about this whole process is the extent to which it becomes profoundly boring. The BRS is an office job. There's too much paperwork, a colleague who won't leave you alone, a place you go when the things you really wanted to do just haven't worked out yet. There are too many forms to fill in. And by God, you better have remembered that it's Wendy's birthday on Friday and we're all chipping in to make sure that she gets a present. The end result of everything that the Bureau does is to further the problem raised by Weaver back in Act 1. Not only do people have nowhere else to go, but even the places you might have, even the places you might remember, just aren't there in the same way anymore. Early in the second act, Shannon asks Conway where they are. Are we inside or outside? Are we in a place that is recognizable? To put her question to Conway another way, can we make sense of where we are in the world? Conway's answer to the inside-outside problem is that it's both. Space has folded around and in on itself. If a place can be reduced to the sum totality of some forms and paperwork, then you might be outside somewhere, but it's still inside. Inside a system, a spreadsheet, a series of exchange relations. And of course, it's all inside your computer as you play through the narrative. Are we inside or outside? Well, Conway's right. It's both. On top of this, these questions of place go a little further. Where is this game happening? The Zero isn't a real place, but it is, after all, Kentucky Route Zero. And as a result, linking this game to such specificity of place also ties it into a wider array of cultural reference points about the South, about Appalachia, about the broader cultural imagination of what that place means and how it should be presented. In terms of how Kentucky and other places in Appalachia are spoken about, it's generally not good. Even if you aren't super familiar with the region, you might well have heard of something like J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, which is a part of a long tradition of presenting this region and the people who live there as poor, white, working class people that can only be saved and transformed through the bootstrapping of themselves into good, productive workers. It's tied up in a host of really long-standing and honestly deeply regressive ideas about that area as inherently conservative, Christian, and white. In contrast, Elizabeth Catte's book, What You're Getting Wrong About Appalachia, underscores that this one-dimensional view of a particular region is a way of enforcing a particular kind of politics that flattens difference and excludes everything and everyone who doesn't fit with that idea of Appalachia as white, working class, and conservative. After all, you're traveling with Shannon Marquez, whose family is full of academics, researchers, and esoteric mathematicians, as well as miners and people who work with their hands. This Kentucky is not simply one thing, the narrow idea of someone like J.D. Vance, but something much more fascinating and strange. You might see churches, but they'll be abandoned, locked, or deserted, but at the same time, the music that you hear draws from old hymns. A place is not just one thing, but in the particularity of how Kentucky is presented here, there are echoes of perhaps many places. As the Oscar-winning film director Bong Joon-ho put it in relation to their film Parasite, it was an attempt to depict something very specific, but that specificity was what made it popular globally. Essentially, we all live in the same country, called capitalism. Alongside this, one of the most important plot lines is developing throughout Act 2, as you run around trying to find out some much needed information about where number 5 Dogwood Drive might be. From the mine, Conway got hurt. His leg isn't doing too good, and Lula Chamberlain, your point of contact at the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces, advises you to find a doctor. Actually, it's less advice and more a directive. You need to stop in and see Dr. Truman as a matter of urgency. Lula gives you directions to his house, but you get there and the house doesn't exist anymore. What is there is a place called the Museum of Dwellings. Previously the site of a neighborhood where Dr. Truman lived, the land was converted into a museum, perhaps at the behest of the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces. After all, you have to do something with all of those abandoned and foreclosed houses. The new museum, still under construction, displays various types of home, ranging from houses to boats to barns, bird cages, and even greenhouses. People who used to live in the neighborhood were allowed to remain within the houses on display, and many, if not all of them, took the offer. Along the way and up on the second floor, you meet Ezra, a small boy who tells you that his parents lost their home when the bank repossessed it, and now, after having to sleep at the bus station, he doesn't seem to know where they are anymore. A lot of the people who now live in the museum don't like to spend the night there. As Ezra puts it, they have nightmares. So he and his brother Julian, who just so happens to be a giant eagle, just go with it, fly them and their houses out to the forest every night, and then back again in the morning before the museum opens. The doctor is out there in the woods, so Ezra decides to call up Julian, and together you all fly out to the woods to find the doctor. When you're there, Conway takes a turn for the worse, but then you all manage to find the doctor as you control Ezra, walking along with the dog, who I named Blue. It seemed to fit. And here we come to another key area which the game explores, namely how economics and health interact. How our own fragility and bodily vulnerability is bound up with the forces which have made it so it is hard times everywhere. You've made it to a doctor, and finally, you might be able to do something about that damn leg which has started to cause Conway to have a pretty worrying limp. So, I think what I'm about to say might sound naive or even a little ignorant to people watching in the United States, but I didn't really know that before starting the research for this video that a third of all GoFundMe campaigns are designed to try and cover medical expenses. Medical costs are the number one reason that people in the United States file for personal bankruptcy. If you haven't read it, I really recommend a book called Health Justice Now, written by Tim Faust. Here's Tim on what it's like to not have health insurance, a situation that more than 1 in 7 people in the United States find themselves.
It's just awful to be uninsured. You're significantly less likely to have diseases like cancer diagnosed before they're severe. You're more likely to die from any given medical condition or disease, and you get less and worse care in the hospital even if you're admitted. Choices like medicine or rent, or healthy food or a doctor's visit, are urgent and deeply infuriating in their obvious injustice, but what can you do about it? Just one accidental injury, like just one engine failure or just one parking ticket, can knock over everything you've worked so hard to put together. If you ever fall sick, the deep and unknowable awfulness of medical costs. How much is this going to cost? Can I put this on a credit card? Can I get on a payment plan? Should I sell my car? Becomes a kind of blaring siren overriding your internal monologue. You try to drink lukewarm water on the side of your mouth with the fewest untreated cavities. Life becomes a kind of self-destructed ultra-marathon. How long will I keep going? What's gonna break next? This kind of desperation drives a lot of horror stories. Some kids growing up uninsured in poor families are punished for going to the doctor because their families can't afford the cost and remain scared of doctors as adults. People who get injured on the job sometimes turn to painkillers to keep them working so they and their children don't lose the insurance tied to their job.
Does Conway have insurance? He works for Lisette, who runs an antiques place. Used to run it with her husband Ira, but he's gone now, and the store itself probably won't be around much longer. So, how to pay? Well, thankfully there's probably a payment plan. The doctor who's treating Conway also has their own financial problems. Those damn student loans, am I right? As the doctor puts it to Conway, getting a scholarship with that pharmaceutical company had a lot of strings attached, but at least I have somewhere to practice, even if I have to follow their marketing trends a bit. And hey, thanks to all those seminars, I'm an expert on the medical use of Neurypnol TM. It's not so bad. As the doctor gets ready to put you under, he asks you to count backwards from 5. And just as you reach 0, he says, "So let's talk about billing for a moment. The pharmaceutical company I'm contracted with was recently acquired by an energy company that has some different standards for billing and revenue. So it's a bit complex now. Health is no longer a natural fact of existence. Under this particular way of thinking, it's an inconvenience, really, as it prevents you from working as hard as you could. Linking health to one's ability to work, and thus earn the money to literally stay alive, raises the stakes of work to the highest possible degree. If this doesn't work out, you are going to die. And as you talk to the doctor, you realize there's almost certainly no way you could refuse his help after all. It's a seller's market, and you are in no position to say no. Before you find the doctor, you end up in a former church, which the Bureau of Reclaimed Spaces have recently turned into a storage facility for excess documents, including the details of how to get to the address you're looking for. There, you meet Brandon. He's there because he's the one who knows how to work the projector and press play on the recorded sermons from the preacher, and he's going to do his job even if there aren't really any people there to listen anymore. Brandon tells you that you probably need to see a doctor. As he puts it, I bet everyone's telling you to go. Hey, I get it. Too expensive. My dad cut his arm pretty bad in a job, but he stitched himself back up because we didn't have health insurance. But then his hand didn't work very well, and he got pretty depressed. And eventually he just sort of, well, I guess I don't know what he should have done. Who knows, right? The title of the homily that will be playing in that deserted church when you arrive is Work is Play for Mortal Stakes. You can stay for a few minutes and listen to the sermon on the dignity of work, on work disconnected and distanced from exploitation. The preacher even mentions the Haymarket affair in Chicago, where workers fought, bled, and died for the 8-hour working day. Work, of course, isn't like that now, after all. And as you drift off in the doctor's office in the woods, it becomes crystal clear that there wasn't any alternative.
Capitalist realism can only be threatened if it is shown to be in some way inconsistent or untenable, if that is to say, capitalism's ostensible realism turns out to be nothing of the sort. Needless to say, what counts as realistic, what seems possible at any point in the social field, is defined by a series of political determinations. An ideological position can never be really successful until it is naturalized, and it cannot be naturalized while it is still thought of as a value rather than a fact. Accordingly, neoliberalism has sought to eliminate the very category of value in the ethical sense. Over the past 30 years, capitalist realism has successfully installed a business ontology in which it is simply obvious that everything in society, including healthcare and education, should be run as a business. As any number of radical theorists from Brecht through Foucault and Badiou have maintained, emancipatory politics must always destroy the appearance of a natural order, must reveal what is presented as necessary and inevitable to be a mere contingency, just as it must make what was previously deemed to be impossible seem attainable. It is worth recalling that what is currently called realistic was itself once impossible. The slew of privatizations that took place since the 1980s would have been unthinkable only a decade earlier. And the current political economic landscape, with unions in abeyance, utilities and railways denationalized, could scarcely have been imagined in 1975. Conversely, what was once eminently possible is now deemed unrealistic. Modernization, Badiou bitterly observes, is the name for a strict and servile definition of the possible. These reforms invariably aim to make impossible what used to be practicable for the largest number, and making profitable for the dominant oligarchy what did not used to be so.
So, in between each act of the game, the developers also released small interactive interludes, which built on the themes and issues of the overall game, and allowed for the developers to try new things in terms of mechanic and style that might not have worked in the main game. This brings up the entertainment interlude, which is the lead-in to Act 3. It takes the form of a complete 3-act play, with you, the player, as a minor character on stage, who watches the action unfold. In terms of its mechanics, the segment just allows you to look around to see what else is happening on stage, but also into the audience, where you can see reviews of the show from local newspapers, the sound cues used by the technician, notes from the director, the set designer, Lulu Chamberlain, and the dramaturg. You know it's not real. The scenes you're watching play out are all a performance. It tells you over and over again that it isn't real. And in a way, this cuts against the grain of what we would normally expect for a video game, right? The whole question is this realistic? Does this seem like a world that exists somewhere in time and space? But here you are at the theatre, constantly reminded that all of this isn't real. Its historical link is to Bertolt Brecht's epic theatre, developed as a counterpoint to the naturalist theatre, wherein, as Brecht put it, people hand in their hat at the cloakroom and with it their normal behaviour. For Brecht, the point of theatre was not to be passive as a spectator, but to turn the spectator into an observer, arousing their capacity for action in the world. So, what are we watching? What does the entertainment want us to reflect on, to take action from? What is the point of the show? It's written by a mysterious playwright called Lem Doolittle, and it's set in the lower depths, a bar in Kentucky, with Harry the barkeep talking to Evelyn, whilst over in the corner sits an old barfly slumped over a drink. That's you. Evelyn and Harry talk back and forth for a bit. She's married and worried that her husband Ted is going to cheat whilst he's out on the road. He's a travelling salesman who is forced to take a new job because business hasn't been good. It's hard times everywhere. Harry doesn't even have beer at the bar anymore. All he's serving is Hard Times whiskey, which is made by a local distillery that has a strange-looking staff. We'll get to that. So, after some back and forth, A new customer, Pearl, comes in. She's looking for her parents, who are apparently regulars, who use their daughter to keep them in whiskey. Pearl doesn't want to keep paying their tab. She's sick of debt. She works at a pawn shop and explains that the owner of the store has come up with a new kind of debt. Of course, originally pawn shops operate on secured loans. You have a piece of property, and that can be used as collateral on a loan. So, what if you didn't need to secure the loan on an item? What if you just offered unsecured loans? Obviously, you need to put it at a higher interest rate and probably tighten the repayment plans because that's pretty risky. Pearl tells Evelyn and Harry that her boss calls it a payday advance, and you can then bundle that debt together and sell it on. And of course, it's those who really need the money that'll take that kind of loan. Once you have no more stuff to use as collateral, all that's left is your own future that can be turned into an asset for someone else to make the most of. The final scene of the entertainment is pretty bleak. Pearl's parents are here now, and they admit that they can't pay back their debts, probably won't get that promotion that they've been banking on. Harry admits that he's been giving away too many drinks, and he had to make a deal to stock the whiskey. Right at the end, he tells them all that all they want is debt. They feed on it. They put it in the whiskey. Lawrence, that's Pearl's father, tries to tell Harry that his debt is to him. It isn't to the distillery, after all. But Harry confesses that it is now. I traded it, he says. I sold it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There is no choice. Someone will be there to collect. Suddenly there appears a bright, glowing skeleton, one of the boys from the Hard Times distillery, here to collect. And then, curtain. Maybe none of this makes sense. Certainly, reviews which found the game often a bit boring didn't seem to get what this section was for, but if you think about it in Brechtian terms, the interlude makes complete sense. What Brecht calls the epic theatre is designed to create in the audience spectators who act. This is precisely what happens in the entertainment. You're watching the action, but you are also part of the performance. Reviews that you can read as floating text in the darkness specifically call you out for being the worst thing about the entire show. Debt is, in essence, a wager against the future. I borrow now because I have to, because I need to, on the potential hope that in the future I will be able to pay back the debt. Debt, then, is the financialization of time. Do you have any debts? Shannon asked that to Conway earlier in the game. I owe some people some apologies, he says. Do you have any debts? Do you? What do we all owe? The idea about time is made pretty literal in the whole question about healthcare, right? You need to pay to secure your own future. You need to pay in order to have the chance of having a future at all. When the entertainment interlude ends, you're back with Conway. He's dreaming, or maybe remembering a conversation with Lisette. She tells him about the last delivery, and we find out that she's not doing well. Words are harder than they used to be. Things are disappearing, and memory has become something that's tricky to hold on to. And though it's never said directly, it's pretty clear the two of them are bonded by the tragedy of the death of Lisette's son. It was an accident, says Conway, but the implication is that he was involved, to some degree at least. You wake up, or come to, and the doctor tells you about the procedure, warning you that you might experience a feeling of lateness, temporal dislocation, and that ever since the Consolidated Power Company have been put in charge of the billing for your new leg, which incidentally is a skeletal limb that has a weird glow to it, it's linked to your electricity bill. As the doctor puts it, you can pay it back in full on your next billing cycle, or you can get on an energy credit payment plan. You'd have to call Consolidated for more details about that, I don't really understand how it works. Something about generating electricity to send it back into the grid. Debt, after all, has to be productive. After talking for a while, you all decide to get back on the road. After all, you don't want to be late for making your delivery. Almost immediately, however, the truck breaks down, but you come across Johnny and Junebug, a synth-pop duo of traveling musicians who, when they walk, make mechanical whirring noises. They are androids, robots. Don't look too hard into it, I suppose. Johnny and Junebug agree to help you out if you'll come to their gig at the lower depths. I get the feeling that not a lot of people go and see these two normally. So you go along with Johnny and Junebug and Ezra and make it to the lower depths, a dive bar that serves whiskey and precious little else. As you get ready for Johnny and Junebug's show, the two are singing a song called It's Too Late to Love You. And as the music starts, the roof of the bar opens up, and all you see is the moon above you as you get to choose the lyrics to the song. It's the same trick that the game pulled in Act 1 with Joseph's computer, where there is no wrong answer. It's just about what song do you want to see Junebug sing? Or, given that you choose the lyrics, what song do you want to sing? You get to perform this beautiful, haunting love song. Your choices determine what the performance is, and importantly, how the performance makes you feel. After the gig at the lower depths, you end up finding your way back to the Zero, and you end up in another network of caves. You come across Donald, who used to work with Joseph, the guy from back at the gas station, and Lula on a project called Xanadu. It's a computer of sorts and a game, too, which has become involved and intermingled with the black mold which you find all throughout the caves. The mold has altered the structure of the computer network, changing it in strange new ways. Donald and his research assistants are suspended in a kind of limbo of sorts, desperately trying to fix the equipment or work out how the cave network with its black mold is impacting the computer. They're trying to do this by mapping and analyzing their environments as precisely as possible, but it isn't working as well as it could because of what Donald calls the strangers, workers from the nearby Hard Times whiskey distillery. The strangers might know how to fix the computer, so you follow some directions and head out of the caves into a graveyard near a church. Shannon and Conway disappear off screen to go and find out how to fix the machine, and come back looking a little shaken by something. You fix the computer, and manage to play through Xanadu, a text adventure game which stars Donald, Joseph, and Lula. It's a kind of map of the world within the world, echoing the representational fictionality of something like Jorge Luis Borges' short story on the exactitude of science. Lula turns up there too, as she was originally part of the Xanadu project. For her, it was kind of an art piece, and by the time you've made it thus far, you've already seen a retrospective of her work in the first interlude called Limits and Demonstrations, which happens sometime after the events of the main game. One of these art pieces in the retrospective addresses her relationships with Joseph and Donald, and suggests that Lula abandon the surface world to explore the Zero. It might be worth thinking about the purpose of installation art, the heyday of which was the decades in the middle of the 20th century. As art historian and academic Claire Bishop puts it in their critical introduction to installation art, the viewers are addressed directly by every work of installation art, by sheer virtue of the fact that these pieces are large enough for us to enter them. Our experience is markedly different from that of traditional painting and sculpture. Instead of representing texture, space, light, and so on, installation art presents these elements directly for us to experience. This introduces an emphasis on sensory immediacy, on physical participation. The viewer must walk into and around the work. Many artists and critics have argued that this need to move around and through the work in order to experience it activates the viewer, in contrast to art that simply requires optical contemplation, which is considered to be passive and detached. This activation is, moreover, regarded as emancipatory, since it is analogous to the viewer's engagement in the world. There's something Brechtian here again, right? Lula's work, the whole point of Xanadu, is not just a doomed intellectual exercise, but is, in a way, an attempt to transform consciousness, to draw in the viewer, the player, into constructing meaning, which is exactly what the game tries to do. You find the documents that Lula needed, and she gives you directions back to the Zero. The next stage of the journey involves you catching a ferry, called the Mucky Mammoth, down the river, which is called the Echo. While you wait for the boat, Conway and Shannon talk about what happened when they were off screen at the distillery. They were met by a skeletal figure called Doolittle, who assumed that Conway was a new employee, there to start as a delivery driver. As you're shown round the distillery by this friendly skeleton, you realize that Conway is a recovering alcoholic. The distillery workers tell you how to repair the computer, and offer you a drink of their very expensive whiskey to seal the deal. Whether you as a player want to or not, Conway takes the drink, harking back to the entertainment. You're in debt to them now, and you'll have to live with that fact. The point always arrives when they come to collect. You work for them now, you're told that you start work tomorrow, but in the meantime, there's a delivery to make. So with Conway, Shannon, Ezra, Johnny, and Junebug, you all catch a ride.
Votre mort, vous y pensez souvent?
De moins en moins, à mesure que j'avance en âge. À mon sens, il faut accepter 2 ou 3 choses dans la vie. Premièrement, d'avoir des ennemis, donc de ne pas être aimé de tout le monde, donc de perdre cette espèce de narcissisme. Deuxièmement, d'accepter de vieillir. Et c'est très difficile, il faut commencer assez tôt. Et alors seulement on peut accepter d'être mortel.
La vie éternelle, qu'est-ce que c'est pour vous?
Ce serait certainement un mythe si nous le pensions uniquement comme après, comme au-delà. C'est d'abord une catégorie du présent. Je crois que nous faisons des expériences d'éternité. Toutes les fois que nous vivons une expérience dont nous avons l'impression qu'elle est fondatrice, qu'elle est, comment dirais-je, une sorte de point où tout se noue dans notre existence, où une grande tranche de vie se décide, où un rapport avec des êtres se noue, s'enchaîne. Et il y a des instants d'une qualité tellement intense que ce sont des grains d'éternité dans un temps qui passe. Alors je crois que toutes les expériences qui sont des expériences fondatrices, à travers un temps qui lui se défait, sont des expériences d'éternité. Et alors, me permettent de me retourner après ça vers ma mort en disant, est-ce que alors l'événement de ma mort peut être une sorte de porte sur une éternité, mais qui a d'abord sa racine dans le présent et dans la vie. Ce n'est pas la survie, mais la vie.
So, by the time you arrive in Act 4, Conway doesn't seem to be doing too well anymore. And as you play through, you're probably having more and more doubts about whether you will ever arrive at the location for your delivery. That strange skeletal limb is spreading now. He's sort of retreated into the background of the scene, talking less, lost in his own memories. He's drinking too much, and he says that he's been seeing those skeletal figures from the distillery on the river with you. So, at a certain point, Kate, the boat's captain, tells Shannon and Conway to take care of a small delivery that the Mammoth can't make. It requires them to hop in a little dinghy. Along the way, you pass through a bat sanctuary, but before that, and before you arrive at the delivery point, you come across a huge array of mining helmets. This is the Elkhorn Mine Disaster Memorial. There's a sign attached to the board which says,
"We claim these helmets in the names of the folks who wore them, and we place them here in their memory, but also as a spit in the greedy green eye of that power company who built up our mine and traded our brothers and sisters' safety for a little more yield, but yielded only 28 good men and women dead when the walls collapsed and the tunnels filled with water. Their lungs were black, but now they're washed clean and full of water too, and swept through hidden tunnels into some awful cave we will never find. And so we guess the water buried them for us. So, let this here be a marker for their grave. And if any son of a bitch from the power company wants to take back these helmets as company property, just try it and see what happens."
Nobody sticks around forever, do they? And it's often the people who most deserve it that maybe don't even get remembered at all. The memorial might never be seen, but at least it's there. How many people worry about never being remembered, never being memorialized? If you think about it in the context of the union struggles and labor organizing, how many of the thousands upon thousands of ordinary working people who worked and organized and fought and died for the right and freedom to unionize or for better wages are remembered now? How many of them got memorials? The labor organizer, folk singer, and storyteller Utah Phillips talked a lot about this idea of the long memory, the story of ordinary people who through committed action had managed to win rights, improve conditions, or better pay, is so often not even memorialized or spoken about. We are the recipients of a story about history, that strips out the work, effort, and victories of working class people who are, in so many ways, the makers of the history we inherit. Seeking to correct this impulse, the British historian E.P. Thompson, at the beginning of their landmark book, The Making of the English Working Class, put it like this: I am seeking to rescue the poor stockinger, the Luddite cropper, the obsolete hand-loom weaver, the utopian artisan, from the enormous condescension of posterity. Their craft and traditions may have been dying. Their hostility to the new industrialism may have been backward-looking. Their communitarian ideals may have been fantasies. Their insurrectionary conspiracies may have been foolhardy. But they lived through times of acute social disturbance, and we did not. Their aspirations were valid in terms of their own experience, and if they were casualties of history, they remain condemned in their own lives as casualties. The ordinary deserves remembrance, but it's all too often it's a history that can only be found buried underground. Before you make the delivery, you talk a little more to Conway. He's increasingly giving up on the idea of making the delivery and says that he wants to go and take the job in the distillery. He offers you his truck to let you take it when he's no longer around. I've got to repay my debt, he says. Hell, I should be grateful for the opportunity. If you want to die with any dignity, you've got to settle up. That's why it's such a damn shame when people go sudden. So you tell Conway to wait whilst you make it to Poppy to complete the delivery. She's a friendly sort underground here, and you might find yourself wondering whether she has anyone to talk to. The answer to that is yes and no. As she explains, she used to be a phone switchboard operator, part of a team of 12 who'd spend their time answering calls and connecting people to those with whom they wanted to talk. It's a pretty vital role, really, being the bridge between people, literally helping them connect. And Poppy will tell you some of her stories about the past. There isn't anyone left, though, and the final phone operator sits there in the dark. It seems that what happened was that the owners decided to bring in a new automated system of work and renamed the center that Poppy works in as Consolidated Auxiliary Switch Number 30. However, because the communication system had been built on an ad hoc basis for so long and was organized around the speed of human communication, not automated communication, which can be infinitely more speedy, their new automated system wasn't working. It lacked the human touch. So Poppy is kept around to let the new automated system learn how to work it like a human being. But here's the thing. Poppy tells you that she's been down here running the whole switchboard system for over a year. Surely this new automated system should be done learning, ready to take over. But as Poppy asks you, what if there is no cheap machine that's going to replace me? What if it's cheaper just to keep me here, filling in for the rhythm of the operators? What if I'm the cheap machine? And can she quit? In this economy? Maybe Poppy says this is better. The system might still be automated, but at least here, in some small way, she's able to make sure that there is an element of humanity to it. It's just a small conversation that you have, but the game manages to do this a lot, having small interactions which serve as a wider example of a bigger problem. And as you leave Poppy there underground, you can't help but think, isn't this what so much of work generally is like now? What are we there for if not to humanize systems which probably don't really need us to function, but do need to keep at least some of us around in order to give a humanizing smile to automation? I've talked about this in a previous video in relation to horror movies and how they present work as something nightmarish. But what is so affecting about this brief moment, this small connection between two people, is the way that it highlights the essential tragedy of alienated work. Poppy used to be able to talk to people who used a phone switchboard. A voice with a smile is how she puts it. But all of that has been stripped away, leaving the only trace of humanity being the touch of fingers flicking switches to allow for communication between people who will never even know her name. And in time, that too will disappear. But maybe it's worse to be the cheaper alternative. An alienated presence kept around to do this because it's less costly to use people than replace them entirely. Do something else? Quit? Ha! In this economy? You get back from talking to Poppy, and before you know it, Conway is gone. He's fully transformed now into a skeleton, and he sets off on a small skiff with 2 others from the distillery. You won't ever see him again. You don't get to say goodbye. There is no emotional moment. He's gone. What's interesting is the way in which people respond to this. For some people, it's too sudden, even unfair, as it deprives the player of the emotional catharsis they expect from the narrative unity of a game. But really, if you've learned anything from traveling on the Zero and sailing down the Echo, it is that social bonds are far more fleeting and more fragile than we would ever like to admit. Economic conditions and imperatives often drive us away from those whom we love, those who we count as friends. Sometimes, no matter how much you might want someone to stay, they'll go. They might even take their dog with them too. And really, did Conway have a choice? Well, maybe. But again, this isn't a game about exploring the choice that characters get to make, but forcing the player to confront their own choices, emotions, and responses to a situation that unfolds in front of them. And here, the question the game asks of you is pretty simple as you stand there on the shore as Shannon, who I didn't realize until that exact moment was wearing Conway's jacket. How do you carry on? How do you deal with loss, which can come out of nowhere so suddenly and so arbitrarily? Really, there isn't an easy answer here, but the game consistently underscores the fragile beauty of human sociality. One day, you might run into someone and travel along with them for a time before your roads diverge. Not out of any failure on your part, but just because that's how things go sometimes. So, you sail back alone, or in my case, with Blue for company. You make it to a lakeside diner called Sam and Ida's, where the rest of the Mammoth crew are waiting for you. And as you go back down the stairs, you hear a song from the Bedquilt Ramblers, who popped up here and there throughout the game. They're singing an old country song called This World Is Not My Home, probably made most famous by an old singer called Jim Reeves, or maybe even the Carter family, who recorded a version of this all the way back in 1931. It's a song about a distinctly religious attitude towards the world. It's not my home, but heaven is. That said, the game recontextualizes this based on what's just happened. As the band sings, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore, it's a goodbye for Conway, who was unable to live in a world where debt had fundamentally reoriented his being towards it. He wanted dignity, to leave things straight, and the only way to get that is to pay up. More broadly, the song directly links to the wider experiences of those who are playing it, and certainly those who are developing it. I can't feel at home. Certainly true if you've lost your home, been stuck renting and moving every time the rent goes up even further, stuck knowing that you might never be able to afford to even buy a home in the first place. As the opening line of the song puts it, this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. We increasingly live lives of liminality, existing in the space between security and precarity. Social bonds have been liquefied, made into something transitory. I mean, we're all just passing through, right? You might leave. You might need to leave tomorrow for a new job or to find a cheaper place to live. You might have debts that have to be paid back. It is in this sense that the game explores the modern existential problems of what it means to live in a world hollowed out by the rampant capitalism of the consolidated power company. In other words, and you may not really buy what I'm saying, but the tragedy of Conway's end, vanishing into the darkness on that tiny skiff of a boat, is nothing less than the tragedy of being human in the modern age.
This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. My treasures and my hopes are placed beyond the blue. Many friends and kin have gone on before, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, oh Lord, what will I do? Angels beckon me to heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I have a loving mother up in glory land, and I don't expect to stop until I shake her hand. She's waiting now for me in heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land, and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me.
Let's go back to the beginning for a moment. At the opening of the game, when you pull off the highway and park up at Equus Oils, you find a trio of people in the basement. They don't seem to be able to hear you or see you, and they're playing a game, squabbling over the rules. One of them asks how you even win this game, and they get the reply that, I don't think you can win. It says on the box it's a tragedy. And tragedies only ever have one ending. But do they have to? After the end of Act 4, when Conway leaves, Shannon and the rest of the group agree to carry on, to find Dogwood Drive and to complete the delivery. You end up at the bottom of a silo. It's the end of the road for the truck, so with Johnny and Junebug and the rest, they unload the truck, and that's where things end. Act 5 opens at the top of the silo. Somehow they all manage to unload everything, and have arrived in an old former company town that used to be occupied and managed by, guess who? The Consolidated Power Company. There has been a disastrous flood which occurred whilst we were underground on the Zero and the Echo. The town is gone. In pieces. Dead. The roads are gone, the water stretches as far as the eye can see. You came all this way, and right at the end, you walked into yet another disaster, one which was unfolding as you were on the road. There's a fragility to journeying somewhere. It is, in a small way, an act of faith, a belief that the place will be there, that people will receive you, that you'll make it, that there will even be a there for you to arrive at. And you get there, and it's all been washed away. Well, not all of it. 5 Dogwood Drive, that mysterious address that you've been aiming toward, is there, a blank and pristine site. Even though it seems like no one lives there, there is still somewhere for you to make the delivery to. So the opening of this act involves you playing as a cat. You get to dart across the puddles and flooded roads and eavesdrop on the various conversations of the town and its survivors. You see the town graveyard, the library, the old Waffle House, the abandoned church. The people there are, in a sense, double survivors. The Consolidated Power Company hollowed the town out, controlling its institutions and leaving the community public access television as a single vestigial presence. You got to see that in the interlude that directly precedes this act. What had made the town unique was the presence of the neighbors, 2 horses who were features of the town. They drowned in the flood, and as you run around the town, you see somebody working on a memorial painting of them. Other people are planning what they might do next, and if you listen closely, you might just hear some of the people who've been on the road for a long time thinking that maybe, just maybe, this might be a place to try and start something new. One of the developers of the game Night in the Woods, Scott Benson, wrote about Kentucky Route Zero, and his thoughts on the game are really interesting.
Kentucky Route Zero has, among other things, always been about what happens after disaster. Those who are gone aren't restored, not bodily anyway, but they're here. What happens afterwards is you bury what you've lost and build again. You have to do this as a community. You have to have solidarity in it, or everything is lost. Solidarity is seeing your struggles and the struggles of others, and seeing theirs and yours, and holding yourself and each other to your common purpose. What you do for the dead after they are gone is a way of putting that into action. One of the ways they remain is in our dedication to them, our continued struggle. In the final moments of this game that took most of a long, tumultuous decade, you come together and sing, not just as a way of paying tribute to who was lost, but as a way of defining what remains. We remain.
You save what you can. You dig a grave if you have to. And then, right at the end of the whole journey, something magical happens. You gather together to bury the horses, and Emily, one of the people who survived the flood, says that she's going to sing. What she decides to sing is a beautiful old hymn. It's called I'm Going That Way. And as she sings and all of the others join in, you see tall figures appear all around you. Ghosts made flesh. Visible again, if only for a few short moments. They are a reminder that, present or not, people can and do take up space around us.
I've heard of a land of joy and peace and wonderful life, a beautiful place of mansions fair and skies so bright, where all who believe the Savior dear forever shall stay. And having been saved by grace divine, I'm going that way. I'm going that way. I'm going that way. Yes, dear, the Savior I adore is with me each day. I'm clinging to Him and never to stray, just singing praises all day long. I'm going that way. For those who are still astray in sin, my Savior may know. I want them to sing that praise above some beautiful day. For glory to Him who died for me, I'm going that way. I know I shall meet Him at the gate when trials are past. I know I shall meet Him face to face in glory at last. Oh, I believe that when we meet, well done, He'll say, while trusting that soul redeeming love, I'm going that way. I'm going that way. I'm going that way. Yes, dear, the Savior I adore is with me each day. I'm clinging to Him and never to stray. Just sing praises all day long. I'm going that way.
History is not fleeting or transient, and even though those who we know might just be passing through, something of them can remain. The writer Richard Gilman Opalski said that ghosts are natural, and this isn't about supernaturalism, but simply about the understanding that as much as we and the world that we live in think only of the present, there is an inescapable history all around us. To try and expunge that, as capitalism does, to create an endless now, is precisely unnatural. After all, a social system that is full of exploitation and suffering should be haunted by the miseries it proliferates. But haunting does not have to be strictly or only negative either. In a way, it's a condition of existence to live with those who aren't here anymore. You made it to the end of your journey, and you lost a lot along the way. But you still have Conway's jacket. He's still here, even if only indirectly. I think it's an experience that a lot of people can relate to on a variety of different levels. You might have friends you've known for a while that you don't talk to anymore, but you found your favorite band through them. You might have lost parents or siblings, but have an old book that they gave you. You might have a coat from a friend that you traveled with for a while that hangs next to your front door. They are, in a way, still taking up space in your life. Ghosts are, to put it simply, memory, although not all memories are ghosts. Again, the game returns to a long-standing question. How do we go on? How do we live with our ghosts? Or, to put this another way, how do we live with our memories of what's been lost? Really, the reason that the final moment when you gather with everyone else in the town who survived to sing is so moving is because it models one of the game's answers to it. By acknowledging the past, by allowing for a collective memorialization, we find new ways of living with our past. Shutting that out and trying to deal with things on a strictly individualist basis leaves us unable to really deal with the social reality of our lives and memories, our interconnectedness with those whom we traveled along the road. At the very end of things, it isn't entirely certain what will happen to everyone involved. A lot of them don't have anywhere else to go or anyone else to be with. And the conversations depend largely upon your own choices, but it seems like quite a few of the people might stick around, and even more importantly, might stick around together. The very final moments of the game are all of you together inside the blank home of 5 Dogwood Drive. You made it. Journey's end. But there, at the end, you go through a door into something new. Together. There's so much I didn't tell you. So much that I didn't talk about. About Weaver and Shannon. About the island of cypress trees that's covered in mushrooms. About Kate and Will. And so many other small moments. I guess there wasn't time. But, you make it to the end of your journey one way or another. You don't win Kentucky Route Zero. But maybe you realize that you don't have to lose either, and that thinking about things in terms of win and loss states is kind of a limiting way to think about art. There's a line of dialogue between Johnny and Junebug that I've been thinking about since I first finished the game. These two were always intended to be working underground. They weren't supposed to have anything to do with music or creativity or transformation. They were machinery. So Ezra, the kid that you meet in Act 2, doesn't have anywhere else to go, and so when I played the game, Johnny suggests to Junebug that maybe in the future, maybe Ezra could tag along with him as well. And Junebug doesn't seem too keen on this. As she says, when we met, we were nothing. Just these grey shadows, but we grew and we filled in. And we did that together. I've been thinking about that because it's a beautiful expression of what can happen when we find one another. Our capacity for change and transformation is directly linked to our social being. It's one of the many reasons I don't buy this obsession with individualist bootstrapping out of our circumstances. The British philosopher Simon Critchley writes that our basic ontological condition is to be in debt to each other. And this isn't in an economic sense, but simply by virtue of the fact that we're thrown into this world completely dependent on others. And in fact, it's when we find one another, when we connect, that we can start to find and realize the extent of what it means to be in the first place. I think this is why Kentucky Route Zero is often included when we start talking about games that can foster empathy. However, I don't know if this is quite the right way to put that. Kentucky Route Zero is weird and verbose and maybe sometimes even a little boring, but it encourages and fosters careful attention on the part of the player. And I think it's this attentiveness that makes the game so impactful. Rather than centering the player, the game encourages you to pay careful and close attention to the characters and stories that are unfolding all around you. The French philosopher Simone Weil said in a letter to a friend that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. By giving our attention to what the game presents, by giving away something of ourselves, we actually come to understand ourselves in a brand new way. When we stop centering ourselves in the world, we discover that attention can be truly transformative. The game usually gets labelled as something like magical realism, and the whole point of magical realism as a worldview is that it emphasises the possibility of the world being redolent with re-enchantment, that the world is not just full of stuff, flat, phenomenal objects, but things which can mean more. At Polygon, they called this the game of the decade. The decade might end when the calendar rolls over, but life continues, unshaded by our need to make sense of a messy, beautiful, confounding world. Set off on your own journey. See what you find. Because we might, if we give away a little of that pure generosity, the attention to the world around us, we might find it to be bigger and stranger and perhaps even a little magical. Thank you for watching.
These things shall pass, and some gray morning we'll look back and smile at heartaches we have known. So don't forget, when shadows gather, the Lord our God is still the King upon his throne. A rose looks gray at midnight, but the flame is just asleep, and steel is strong because it knew the hammer and white heat. These things shall pass and life be sweeter when love and faith are strong. They cannot long endure.